Morning, everybody, and welcome to this launch hosted by Civil Institute. We at Civil Institute are launching the SADC Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index. My name is Belinda Chora, and I am one of the coordinators here at Civil Institute. I will be facilitating today's launch event. I am joined by a number of colleagues from Civil Institute who are going to introduce themselves as the event proceeds. We are live streaming this event on some of our social media platforms. You can follow our conversations online using some of the hashtags. I'll ask some of our team members to post them in the chat right now. So we've got hashtag philanthropy, hashtag enabling empowerment, hashtag African philanthropy, hashtag SADC. The index that we're launching can be found online at africanphilanthropy.org. So you can take a look, but we will give more detail as the day proceeds. I'm going to start now by inviting the Executive Director of Civil Institute, who is Dr. Tendai Murisa. He's going to walk us through very quickly what this index represents, the SADC Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index represents. Why is it important for nonprofits in the SADC region and for the rest of the continent? By way of introduction, of course, Tendai Murisa has over 15 years of experience working, I'm sure it's more than 15 years now, working in public policy. He's got a lot of experience in uncovering what citizen agency means, looking at social movements, not just in Africa, but in Latin America, in Asia as well. He's also got a lot of experience looking at the philanthropy landscape in Africa and in different parts of the world. Nonprofits and pro-poor development across the continent of Africa. He's a blogger. Some of his recent blogs can be accessed at www.beyondthecrises and www.tendaimarisa.org. So, Dr. Tendai Murisa, I'm going to invite you to, you've already unmuted, just to walk us through why the SADC Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index, why is this important and why is today that important?
Thank you, Belinda, and good morning to colleagues joining. I see we've got quite a bit of colleagues who have joined us already, and thank you for making the time. We do not take this for granted. It's mid-morning. You could be busy with your office schedules, but here you are with us. It's an exciting day for us here at Civil Institute. It's a culmination of close to 12 months of research, prior to that, fundraising, then research, then producing this. But before I go into the philanthropy index, I think it's very important for us to provide a framing of why we do what we do. We believe in, there are many entry points into democracy and development, but for us, the entry point is citizens' agency. What citizens do. So that's what we spend a lot of our time trying to understand. So there are many things that citizens do. Citizens come together and establish associations. Citizens come together and establish schools, for those who call missionary schools. Citizens do a lot of things. They provide solidarity to one another. Citizens speak truth to power. They ensure that those who are in public office are accountable to to those who voted them and also over public resources. So these are quite a number of things that citizens do. And over the years, we've been interested in a citizen-centered democracy, to say citizens should inform the kind of democracy we want. Citizens should inform the development path that we want. So that's one. Then our work cuts across three centers, which is civic agency, civic engagement, philanthropy, and social entrepreneurship and inclusion. But it is just because we are gathered today by colleagues in the Center for Philanthropy, we'll talk about what citizens do in a space of philanthropy. For many, and in many instances, philanthropy has been understood as the game of the rich, what the rich do with excess wealth that they have. That they give to the poor, etc., etc. Those are documented studies, and that's an important strand of what citizens do and what high net worth individuals do or what corporates do. But we also look at a different layer of philanthropy, what we call horizontal philanthropy, or what others have called the giving by the poor, where common citizens give to common causes across by providing little parcels or pockets of money to make it big. So others are now calling that crowdfunding, etc. In our languages, I come from both Matabeleland and Mashonaland. Umbambaniso. That's what we'll call it in Ndebele. In Shona, they'll call it something like what communities do, kubatanidza, etc. So all those are expressions of philanthropy as far as we're concerned. And when we started this work that has culminated in the index, it's 4 years in the making. Initially, what we focused on was to say, how do we help? How do we become a center of support to citizens who are already engaged in processes of giving on their own, or citizens who are engaged in processes of establishing what you may call community foundations. These are membership-driven organizations that you find in almost every community. Some of it is not a formal organization. Again, from Matabeleland, where I was raised, every time there was a funeral for us who lived in the low-income areas, there will be members of the community who go door to door, collecting meal, collecting money to help out with the funeral. So for us, we looked at that, said, these are expressions of citizen-to-citizen solidarity, citizen-to-citizen welfare. So we began to map all these processes across the country. We came out, our study showed us over 17 community foundations spread across the country. And some of them did not even call themselves foundations, but it was based on the methodology that we used to say, if there are members in this kind of group, and if members contribute at least 15 or 20% of the annual budget of this entity, then it is a community foundation. But when we did that, we began to realize something that kept on coming up in our studies: the extent to which laws regulate giving, laws provide incentives for giving or actually inhibit giving. Given also our comparative studies with our colleagues in the US, where we see how incentives for structures that are established with tax-deductible status can actually sort of spare giving amongst the rich and even amongst ordinary citizens. So we began to say, can we just try to understand the legal environment, the extent to which it actually promotes or inhibits giving? And we said, let's just not look at Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe may be an exceptional case, but let's try to understand our region. And we did this with understanding of what was already within SADC, because at that moment, SADC was talking about domestic resource mobilization as an important pillar of the region's development. And for some of us, we began to realize that if SADC is talking about DRM, domestic resource mobilization, it is important to break this further beyond what they are saying, because from then on, they were looking at how governments can mobilize resources, maybe through pension funds, etc., etc. But we began to say, but citizens are already doing some of this work. It's just not being acknowledged. So in the 10 SADC countries that we studied, there is no country that has a policy on philanthropy or a policy on giving. So they have no incentives, etc., except for South Africa, which has some elements of it, but not a coherent strategy around it. But what we began to realize that, especially in crisis countries or countries that go through crisis like Malawi after the flooding, etc., what the first responders are normally the citizens or the locals. They are the first responders and also the last responders. In between, the aid industry may come in and help out, but they have an entry debt and they have an exit debt. But what sustains communities is the work of those citizens. But we began to say to ourselves, how do we make sure that this is sustainable, that this grows, this is acknowledged? So we came across this fact that there is a stumbling effect, and is in the form of either law is silent on this sort of aspect of our social lives, or the laws that are in existence actually inhibit, some of them without the intention to do so, but actually having the effect of that. So we began to say, no, let's put together a study and try to understand this, because our hypothesis is, if there is a healthy environment that nurtures and promotes giving, some of these current challenges that citizens and their formations face could be resolved by communities themselves without having to rely on government or aid agencies. So we begin to say that for us to really push this local agency argument, we really need to explore and to begin to interact with the laws. So we came across this study. We came across the need for this study based on those findings. And at that moment, thankfully, our colleagues at WINGS, the Global Philanthropy Network, were also issuing out a call for proposals to do with understanding the philanthropy environment, understanding the challenges that are there, etc. So when we presented this proposal, it aligned with some of the questions they were asking themselves. And we actually felt like, oh, this we could do not only in SADC, but we should do at a Pan-African level. But we felt the need to say, let's experiment and let's pilot Zimbabwe first. SADC first. Once we've done the 10 SADC countries, we begin to, number one, it will help us to improve our methodology. Number two, it will help us to have an understanding of the broader patterns and to begin to tease them out in the sub-regions. So as we speak, even before we have launched the index, we have already commissioned studies in East African countries. We are hoping to have by the end of July also a similar index that now incorporates the East Africa space, because we're trying to really have a proper understanding of how laws, policies, and practices, official practices of government affect or inhibit philanthropy. And a third dimension related to this, not only the coincidence with funding, etc., but also what governments were doing. You know, we are all living under new legislation in trying to respond to threats of terror, global terrorism, and also threats around funding that terrorism. And also studies have shown that NGOs or philanthropy money, etc., have at some point, even without them realizing it, have been used as vehicles to move money that has actually been then used to support acts of terror. So there is a huge counter-terrorism consensus amongst governments driven by the US government and many others. So through that, there's a ranking system that looks at each country's laws to say that how compliant is this country vis-a-vis the global best practice around countering terrorism. Zimbabwe at some point was gray listed, etc., etc. But what has happened is many countries, based on that imperative and also then the listing that happens, because if you are gray listed, that means that your financial institutions cannot be trusted entirely to move resources, to move finances, etc. So that even affects the manner in which financial transactions are done across countries, across borders. So many governments came up with new measures to clamp down or to actually make sure as part of the counter-terrorism basket. But in it, there was opportunism on the part of governments. They began to ask questions that were more far-reaching than what the counter-terrorism act or counter-terrorism consensus was asking for. So where they were just being asked to say, no, you need to know the source of funding, etc., it became an opportunity for those who are concerned about philanthropy supporting issues to do with democracy, governance, etc., to begin to demand on NGOs to say, we want to know your source of funding, we want to understand the purpose of that funding, etc., literally intruding into programming privileges of NGOs. So in the process, the movement of finances becoming even constrained across the region, across countries. So that's an aspect that sort of becomes an impetus for new laws that are coming across SADC. So you'll find, as Shelley launches the index, that many of the laws that are under study and that we're concerned about are post-2011, 2012, 2015 phenomena in response to the threat of terrorism, money laundering, and fraud at a global level. So, but like I said, I do not think that even us who are in the nonprofit space are saying we don't want measures to do with counterterrorism, or we don't want measures that look at possibilities of money laundering. But we're saying that in many instances, especially here in Zimbabwe, what we saw in Angola, what we're seeing in Botswana, are actually measures that have gone a bit too far in terms of regulating this space. And they are doing it in an unfair way that is actually beginning to constrain on the philanthropic freedoms of those who give out resources, but also on the freedoms of NGOs and others who are usually beneficiaries of these funds. And many will ask to say, am I not contradicting myself? Because I started off by talking about community foundations. For us, our theory around community foundations is what we say they need a ladder, or they need a platform of sorts that helps them to grow. So at the moment, we appreciate that the majority of the entities that we're calling community foundations in Zimbabwe and in other African countries raise less than 50% from their local communities, but they raise the majority from international funders. So we're concerned now about the movement, or the ease of movement of funds across countries, within countries, and across regions. So that's why we're studying this. Community foundations are not yet in a place where they have financial autonomy or where they have endowments of their own to sustain themselves. They still rely on the international philanthropy system to sustain themselves. So that gives us a space, those three pillars that I've spoken about, the local existence of community foundations, etc., and also this alignment that we see with what we're doing and what Wings is talking about, and the emergence of these three of the laws, the consensus of the laws that we are seeing across the region, but also our interest in growing philanthropy as a pillar of development within the SADC region. So this gives rise to saying, as we're speaking about DRM at SADC level, we need to be sensitive to laws that may actually constrain DRM. Let me use Zimbabwe as an example as I close off. Zimbabwe's, one of the biggest sources of Zimbabwe's foreign currency remittances is from the diaspora, diaspora. But when we study at the moment, because we're talking of a first generation diaspora, the majority of the resources are being channeled towards family and infrastructure development. A family in Canada or in the UK saying, we want to retire in Zimbabwe, let's build a home. But when we study other communities that have mature diasporas, like if you look at India, etc., what we begin to see is that by the time we get to the second and the third generation, these people become interested in funding community-related projects. So for us to prepare for that emergence of a diaspora that is going into saying, we want to fund Chivi Rural District Association, we want to fund Fletcher High School because we went to Fletcher, etc., we need to make sure that the laws actually promote that. So this is actually where we are. And we are looking at making sure that this happens across SADC, and also that there is some level of transparency and measuring, because the measuring is not necessarily about shaming, but it's also some form of peer pressure to say, if Botswana is doing so well, why can't Zimbabwe do better in this area? If Malawi has come up with new laws, then it may be an impetus for Mozambique to also come up with similar laws. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the background to what we are trying to do at Civio. Have we got it right yet? We hope we're going somewhere. We hope that it's just not an index that is on my computer, but it's an index that becomes alive because it's spoken about. We can talk to everyone about it, and we can begin to use it to really grow the philanthropy sector. We can begin to use it to begin to say, when we're talking to SADC, to say some of the best guidelines you can come up with, because we're also looking at guidelines to promote philanthropy in the SADC region. And my colleague Eda will come and talk about some of our thinking around these guidelines, what they need to look like, etc. So the task is not anywhere 50% complete. We've just begun on the journey. And while I'm here, I might also acknowledge that we are not alone in working in philanthropy. We are part of a bigger community. We work closely with the Center for African Philanthropy and Social Impact based at Wits University. And one of my colleagues from that center is going to be presenting after me, I believe. We also belong to the African Philanthropy Network, which is literally the mother body for anything to do with philanthropy on the continent. So we are part of a community, and we are hoping that as we are making these contributions, we are contributing to a greater development of philanthropy, even beyond SADC, and that we will not be able to do this work as Civio alone, but we can work with others. Sorry, Belinda, I ended up taking so much time. I think it's the coffee, etc. That combination tends to be dangerous in the morning, but thank you for indulging me.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Dr. Mrisa. I'm going to call up next Marlon Zakeo, who's going to be talking to us about the challenges and the opportunities for philanthropy in the SADC region. For those who may not know Marlon, he is a lawyer and international development practitioner, currently serving as a technical advisor and thematic lead on legal and policy frameworks with GIZ, strengthening national and regional linkages in the SADC program, based here in Botswana. And in his role, he coordinates technical support towards research and advocacy initiatives for the establishment of strengthening of national coordinating frameworks and structures for SADC, regional integration, as well as resource mobilization within SADC member countries. Marlon, I'll invite you to unmute your mic and, of course, turn on your video if you'd like people to see your face, and give us your take on what this means for the opportunities and the challenges for philanthropy in the SADC region.
Thank you very much, Belinda, and good morning, colleagues. I would like to, first of all, extend my appreciation to the Severe Institute for the invitation. I'm grateful and really happy to join you and joining colleagues that are connecting from different parts of the continent and beyond. That was a long introduction. I apologize if it was me that sent that, but thank you very, very much. I'm not sure if I'm able to share. If you'd like me to share my presentation, Belinda.
Yes, you can go ahead, Marlon.
Okay. Okay, so I first of all would like just to, for setting up of context, that I come to this meeting wearing two hats, and that may become evident in the short presentation that I will give. One, of course, is as an interested student of philanthropy and a specific topic on regulation of philanthropy and the broader nonprofit sector. But I also bring then my work hat, presenting also on behalf of our project, which is the Strengthening National Regional Linkages in SADC program, which is a SADC program. So just for the context, I will share a little bit about the background of our project, so that perhaps it gives a bit of background on the submissions that I'll be sharing. So the SNRL, as we call it, is a SADC project that is implemented by GIZ based here in Botswana. And it came about because of various factors and observations. One being that there's been an observed gap between commitments at the SADC regional level and actual implementation on the ground. And various reasons have been found for this situation, one of which is the weak alignment of national plans and regional plans. There was also a realization that there are dormant or absent national coordination structures for SADC regional integration, and these are quite key in terms of steering compliance and implementation at the national level. It was also discovered that there is a weak collaboration between national coordination structures as well as planning and budgeting authorities. And I think, as Dr. Murisa was speaking, this is something that speaks to the issue as well of domestic resource mobilization and how to usher in resources to support or sustain implementation of regional integration programs and development in the SADC region. It was also found that there was little alignment between priorities of international cooperating partners and the SADC agenda. And I think of even greater interest to the workshop today, the limited involvement of non-state actors, including the academia and private sector. We also find the challenge of commitments to multiple regional communities amongst the member states in SADC. As you know, we are sharing borders with other RECs, and so that has also put a strain on the focus of the member countries of SADC. And all of this also turn into the issue of having a low awareness of the benefits of SADC regional integration amongst national stakeholders. So quickly again, as I mentioned, our program that I'm representing, the lead partner is SADC, and this phase that we are implementing is from August 2022 to July 2025, but it was preceded by a previous phase from 2016, January to July 2020. 2022, and it is from this period that I'll be sharing some insights that we've gleaned in interacting with both state and non-state actors. The program is funded by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and is working with all 16 SADC member states, working with SADC national contact points, SADC national planning entities, SADC national committees, national sector institutions, various ministries, also with SADC national media coordinators and non-state actors that participate in regional integration activities. I think ultimately the main objective really of this project is to support SADC member states to coordinate and facilitate implementation of regional commitments, and to ensure that progress is accelerated towards implementation of the SADC regional integration agenda. And at the heart of this, the main objective that we are working on is supporting the implementation of the legal and strategic SADC framework in the member states. So as a way of strengthening the SADC regional integration. So this is why we find the topic that CVO Institute is bringing to be of utmost importance as well as part of this objective. And so it's three main ways that we work. First is regarding the institutional framework of SADC, is working with others to improve the institutional framework for implementation of regional integration in the member states. And so that's looking at all the national structures, protocols, and any other structures that are provided for under the SADC Treaty. Secondly, is to support the setting up of monitoring and evaluation systems for the implementation of regional integration in the selected member states to ensure that there is tracking of implementation of the protocols. And then finally is to support the strengthening of communication capacities of SADC and the member states on the impacts of SADC in the member states. I think just a quick rundown of some of the work that the SNRR program has been doing with non-state actors across the region, some of which might be here in this workshop, include the Southern Africa Trust, which has been working really together with other non-state actors to coordinate inputs into the SADC Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan and the SADC Vision 2050, and coordinating and supporting participation of non-state actors broadly and their inputs into these processes. We've also been working with the National Initiative for Civic Education in Malawi as part of enhancing awareness and reaching out to communities so that there can be participation of communities in SADC regional integration interventions, as well as in the national structures for SADC in Malawi. There has been also work with two think tanks in South Africa, based in South Africa, regional think tanks that work on promoting implementation of the SADC protocol on science, technology, and innovation. Work also with the Center for Conflict Resolution on development of knowledge products, policy briefs and awareness raising on SADC regional integration agenda. And regarding the key issue of domestic resource mobilization, recently we have worked with the Wits University and CAPSI that has been mentioned in the opening remarks on capacity building for national officers in SADC governments on both traditional and innovative methods for resource mobilization to ensure sustained support for regional integration projects in the member countries of SADC. And then finally, also working with the University of Botswana on convening public lectures as awareness raising platforms, but also development of regional integration knowledge material in the form of 2 volumes on public participation in SADC regional integration. So I think all of this really is just in brief a sharing to see how our program finds the strategic importance of supporting non-state actors and the role that they play in the regional integration agenda and why that is so important. I think also this is backed up by what we identify in also literature and what is supported by scholars. And we found that, as may have been mentioned again in the opening section, that philanthropic organizations are really increasingly taking up important roles in providing essential public goods, which have been traditionally the preserve of the state. And we have seen that in many areas, including public health, education, science, disaster responses, and especially in recent years, where we've been going through the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've gone through Ebola, and we've gone through natural disasters that are due to climate change and so on and so forth. And we have seen African philanthropists and philanthropy organizations really coming to the fore and being the first responders, as correctly said in the beginning, and staying the course. We've seen the Higher Life Foundation as an example. We've seen the role played by the Dangote Foundation. We've seen the role played by the likes of the Gift of the Givers across Southern Africa and even beyond, both in mobilizing human technical capacities and financial resources as a way of responding and supporting and complementing the efforts or filling in the gaps that would have been left by the state and the private sector. But we also see that increase in the role that is being played by philanthropic organizations is also on the side developing with an increase in regulation of NPOs at a global level. But this is also been seen in the SADC region, and this is a phenomenon that's been evolving over time, and our scholars and philanthropic organizations here, including the African Grantmakers Network, which is now the African Philanthropy Network, have already been tracking this phenomenon of increase of regulation, which maybe has not necessarily been enabling, and that's a debate that is ongoing among scholars and practitioners. But it's been argued that regulation is essential to ensure transparency, accountability, and safeguarding the interests of marginalized communities. And we've also heard that in issues of trying to counter abuse, it is important for states to put up these laws. And so this is part of what is argued when certain restrictions are put in place, whether it is about registration processes, reporting requirements for philanthropy, and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of it really has been covered very well in a report that we're going to be hearing about later in this workshop. And I think one of the issues that I've been following also as a student with interest is how we classify what the typologies of this regulatory framework. And a scholar called Dimati has tried to do this using the case of Kenya, and coming up with a 4-part classification of the kind of regulatory frameworks and laws that we can find. And he calls one rigid conservatism, the other bureaucratic liberalism, the other permissionless association, and then finally legitimized pluralism. And all of these are really giving a spectrum from the most restrictive kind of laws that are being put in place to the ones that are maybe most permissible, that are giving an environment that is enabling for philanthropy to thrive. Again, we mentioned that because of what we've been witnessing, it is really clear that philanthropy is essential for the survival of democratic societies. And leading personalities, including Mrs. Graça Machel, has already mentioned that our governments should be focused on creating spaces for everyone to contribute to development. And so it is really important that the spirit and intent of emerging regulatory frameworks and laws in our region and the continent should be focused on rather freeing up the space so that there could be maximum or optimum contribution to integration and development in our region. And this is really beneficial for governments as well to partner with philanthropic foundations so that you also really alleviate pressure on state resources, which are not that much as we all know, and help to build in community resilience and strengthening civil society. So in our view, really philanthropy must be promoted, and there is greater potential for supporting the role that can be played by philanthropic organizations in SADC's regional integration agenda and development. In terms of the legal architecture of SADC, even though the word philanthropy itself is not mentioned or may not be mentioned, there is a lot of reference to stakeholders and non-state actors. And these, I think, for us, should be read broadly to also apply to philanthropic organizations. And we find that the treaty places a lot of emphasis on promoting people participation in the implementation of SADC's regional integration and development agenda. And we find several articles that say that. The SADC treaty also obliges all member states to establish SADC national committees. And in those committees, it is also peremptory for member states to include non-state actors. And in our view, that should also include philanthropic organizations. And the main strategic blueprints for the region, the Vision 2050 and the RSDP of 2020 to 2030, also place high emphasis on the inclusion of communities and citizens in development. And so we find that at least the legal architecture of SADC is progressive in making a clear case for involvement or participation of citizens and their formations in its development. And various protocols, and now most especially the newly approved mechanism for engagement with non-state actors, is providing a very clear opportunity for people participation in SADC's regional integration agenda. And I think that's one of the things that I would like to share today, that for philanthropic organizations is an opportunity to look at how philanthropy in its organized formats can also be part of operationalizing this new or newly approved SADC mechanism for engagement with non-state actors. I won't dwell on this. Is also just a slide to share an example in Mozambique of how national structures have been put up, supported by a national law that allows for almost an equal participation of state agencies, state actors in the SADC National Committee, with members from the non-profit sector, including philanthropic foundations that are taking lead roles in certain cluster or subcommittees that are driving the SADC agenda at the national level in Mozambique. So this is an example and a model for peer learning and exchange that we found useful for sharing. Now, regarding what we found in our work to be some of the opportunities, I just mentioned that the operationalization process for this newly approved SADC mechanism for engagement with non-state actors is a clear opportunity for philanthropic organizations, perhaps to look at how they could influence or contribute to the operational environment, both at regional and national level in the various countries. I think this is a process that many of you might have been following that has taken quite a number of years now, but there is finally been an approval by the SADC heads of states in the last summit in Kinshasa. And now the process is at the level of technical operationalization and engagements. And so that would be really good for philanthropic organizations and the broader civil society to be engaging on SADC on how this can be rolled out so that it is transformed from paper into real life. An important part of this process is the development of accreditation guidelines for non-state actor participation, which is currently taking process. We understand that some regional civil society formations have been part of this process of making inputs into the accreditation guidelines. And I think this is another opportunity then in the context of talking about what kind of regulatory frameworks we need in our region to enable citizen participation. I think this is the sort of opportunity to make a contribution so that the guidelines that emerge are guidelines that are more enabling, really, rather than restrictive, and they open up the space for philanthropic organizations and civil society in general to contribute fully to the SADC regional integration agenda. We've also found that potentially the engagement with the SADC Parliamentary Forum would perhaps bring very good benefits based on the mandate, the strengthened mandate of the SADC Parliamentary Forum as a formal organ of the SADC infrastructure, and also the experience that is within the SADC Parliamentary Forum in terms of developing model laws. So one could foresee engagement between philanthropic organizations in the SADC region, the Sevio Institute and other research organizations, to support the development of model laws that can then be adapted and customized to enable the smooth or free work of philanthropic organizations in our various members. This is most important because we find that there is quite a varied spectrum of laws amongst the member states in SADC based on different legal traditions, national context, and so on and so forth. So I think that the recommendation for development of common standards that can be applied in a progressive and enabling way would be good, and partners such as the SADC Parliamentary Forum might just be one of the key potential allies for philanthropy. We also believe that the ongoing interventions to establish or strengthen SADC national committees across the member states also provide an opportunity for philanthropy to engage, to influence positively, and to contribute also from philanthropy's own value and experience and knowledge into shaping rules, regulations, and frameworks that should champion philanthropy in the different countries. And then finally, just closely related to issues of resources, we also know that SADC has been working for a long time on the establishment of a regional development fund as part of operationalizing its resource mobilization framework. And yet again, this is something where philanthropic organizations we have a unique contributing advantage that could be taken in engaging and strengthening its relations with SADC organs. In terms of the challenges, I think a lot of them have been documented in the reports that will be launched today, but we've also seen in our work that we continue to be challenged with a trust deficit between state and non-state actors. And this has, in many instances, contributed to what has come up as restrictive operational environments, and also the increase in promulgation of restrictive pieces of legislation in the member countries. And these, unfortunately, do hinder the progress or the potential of philanthropy to assist or to play a positive role in development and integration in our SADC region. The aspect also of a varied spectrum of NPO regulations from one member state to another means that we don't have a coherent framework across the region and models that are easily identifiable, perhaps for countries that are seeking to either amend, adjust, or put up new regulations. And again, this then goes back to the issue of the importance of exploring guidelines or model laws that can be considered by SADC member states as progressive ways of engaging philanthropy or enabling philanthropy at work. The non-inclusion of non-state actors in national policy processes and structures, and also at regional level, is another challenge that we have continued to face and that we working together with others. And that is important to keep pushing. And the mechanism for engagement, as mentioned a couple of times now, present a clear golden opportunity in our view to strengthen the citizen participation in SADC. Finally, that we have a potential of transforming what has been on the treaty, on the books, to real life on the ground. I think we also have a challenge in terms of knowledge gaps that perhaps on both sides, that is knowledge gaps within the SADC architecture on the value and potential of philanthropy to affect regional integration, and also on the other hand, perhaps a knowledge gap within philanthropic organizations about what is there in the regional frameworks, also national frameworks that can affect how philanthropy organizations and the broader NPO sector can work effectively. We also find that there are very few philanthropic organizations that are working on regional integration issues at both national and regional level. And perhaps there is an opportunity to mobilize more and more numbers, critical mass, to start to engage on these regional integration matters, because they are too important really to be left only to member states. And this is an enterprise for every formation and every citizen formation. And also perhaps the absence of national platforms for philanthropy to coordinate structured engagement at the regional level, especially and maybe in member states, is also an impediment. We know that perhaps in South Africa we have the IPASA. I personally am not aware of other formations in other countries. So perhaps at this point, Belinda and colleagues, would like to come to a close and thank you very much for this opportunity to share. And I want to once again congratulate CVO Institute for the incredible work that has been done to document the landscape on the ease of doing philanthropy in our SADC region. And we wish you the best and look forward to further engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marlon. Your presentation was very insightful and spoke accurately to the work that we are also doing as well. So there are several times where I thought, we might need to stop, but your presentation was really good. And thank you so much for all of that. And I think just to, as our next speaker prepares his presentation, just to remind everybody who's connected into our Zoom room, that we do, and even if you're watching on Facebook, if you've got a question or a comment that you'd like to pass on to our speakers, please feel free to post it in the chat. We'll be able to curate those questions in a short while and get all the people who are going to do presentations to answer those questions, including Marlon, who's just talked right now. I think we need to go quickly into our country reports, where we're going to be looking at the state of legal frameworks for philanthropy and looking at key insights from some of the countries that we looked at in the development of this index. And I'm sure one of my colleagues is going to explain later. Dr. Mrisa did mention it earlier, that we undertook a study of 10 SADC countries last year. In our meeting today, obviously, we can't go through all of the countries. We've just chosen 4 of those countries. We are going to look and hear from the country researchers from Botswana, Eswatini, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. And they, in very quick formation, sorry to not give you as much time as you'd have liked. I know we had said 10 minutes each. I'm going to bring that down to about 7 minutes for each presenter. In very quick formation, they're going to give us the key things that they found in each of those countries. So just to remind us of the needs that Dr. Mrisa mentioned in his key address, Marlon also talked about the challenges and the opportunities and currently what the state of philanthropy is like in the SADC region from their perspective. But now we're going to do a deep dive into each country. I'm going to invite up first our country researcher from Botswana, who is Mogalova. He is a lecturer in the Department of Political and Administrative Studies at the University of Botswana. and he does a lot of research in the issues of public finance, governance, public policy, and comparative administration. Now, Mr. Mokhalwa, I'm going to invite you to share your screen. If you would like to also, show your face, just so that people can see who you are. And just as a reminder, like I said, let's try to bring the presentation into 7 minutes. I would really appreciate it. Do also try to keep a check on your chat. I will be timing you.
Hi, Belinda, are you back? We just lost you for a second.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, Mokhalwa, are you connected?
Looks like it affected all of you people in Botswana. Maybe you guys had a power cut. We can't hear you.
I'm not sure what the challenge was. I'm sorry about that, everyone. If he is not connected, I can ask our next speaker from Eswatini, Kandelihle Simelane. If you are connected, maybe you can go ahead. We might be having challenges in Botswana, so I'm not sure whether Mokhalwa has managed to reconnect. But I will introduce our next speaker if Dr. Simelane is connected. Please unmute your mic. Okay.
Thanks,
All right.
Belinda. I'm not sure if you have my presentation because I sent it to.
Okay. All right. So I'll just ask somebody from the CVO team, Leon, if you are able to share Dr. Simelane's presentation as I introduce him very quickly. And so for those who are not aware, he's going to go through his presentation. He's representing Eswatini. He was a country researcher from Eswatini, and he's going to be giving us the state of the legal framework for philanthropy in that country. Dr. Simelane, please go ahead.
Thank you. As introduced, I'm Kandelihle Simelane. I undertook the Swaziland part of the research. Next slide, please. We recognize that giving is intrinsic to African culture and in tradition. So for us, sharing is a state of mind. So we can safely say that philanthropy, the history of philanthropy dates back to pre-colonial history of Eswatini, which is such that giving is part of African culture, and ultimately it is part of Swazi culture. Next slide, please. We looked at several aspects of laws that cover several aspects of philanthropy. Registration was one, where we picked up 2 laws that support the registration and protection of the operations of NGOs or NPOs in the country. We call it Eswatini, and Swaziland still applies. One is the Companies Act number 8 of 2009, which seeks to provide for the constitution, registration, and management, administration, and winding up of companies. The other one is the protection of the names and pages of 1969. Again, that one seeks to protect just the names. So next slide. Then we also looked at the compliance processes, where it emerged that the state doesn't exert much pressure, much force on NGOs for them to remain registered. But then they're expected CSOs are expected to pay taxes on activities that are non-exempt. There's a provision for tax exemption in terms of the value-added tax of Act of 2011. Next slide, please. In terms of tax regimes, like I've mentioned previously, there's the Value-Added Tax Act of 2011, which provides for the imposition of VAT. There's the Income Tax Order of 1975, which defines tax-exempt organizations. There's also the Customs and Excise Act of 1971, provides for the levying of customs, excise, and sales duties. So then there's also the Exchange Control Order of 1974, which exempts charitable organizations from income tax deductions. There's concern, which is what Dr. Marisa raised earlier, of tax fraud by organizations where some masquerade as charitable organizations while others falsely claim that they are philanthropic. Next slide, please. We also looked at the ease of the movement of financial resources within and across borders, where are picked up two laws that stand out. One is the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Act, and then there's the National Clearing and Settlement Systems Act of 2011. These laws are strict, and they seem to slow down the movement of money. That's the concern, especially across borders. But then these seemingly difficult processes is easy for those organizations that tick all the boxes, as they have provisions in law that protect them and support them as they move money needed for philanthropic work. Next slide, please. So the broader picture from the survey, because we did the desktop review, and then also we conducted a survey of philanthropy-focused organizations in the country. The desk review indicated that there is a lack of legislation that is specific to these central civil society organizations in the country, and in particular philanthropy-focused organizations. And what also stands out was that most of these philanthropy-focused organizations depend on funding from private sources, with very little coming from probably external sources or corporate. And then besides tax exemption, the country statutes provide no incentives to promote giving as part of national development. And I thought that one is a gap. What also stood out was that there is laxity in terms of the enforcement of compliance processes amongst civil society organizations, such that some that I spoke to were just clear that you go in, you register, and that is it. You just operate. There's no follow-up from government. And ultimately, next slide, please. When you ask where to from here, I thought there's need for capacity building and training for philanthropy-focused organizations on legislation that affects them. which is the gap that emerged from the survey. There's also a need for a review of legislation to make it dynamic and responsive to the space of civil society organizations, philanthropy-focused organizations in particular, and to provide incentives for giving. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that quick whiz, as we had requested. We really appreciate it. That was the overview from Eswatini, from our country researcher in Eswatini, who is Kandelihle Simelane. And now I'm going to just check again on Botswana. Maybe we can go back to that one. If Mokhalova is ready, we can do that presentation. Mokhalova, are you ready? No. If not, let us go to our, okay, you are ready. That's fine. Please, can you share your presentation? Okay. I think Mokhalova might be having some challenges. Leon and the Civic team, if you could just check in on him, just to make sure that everything's okay. Because of time, I'm going to move to Malawi, and I'm going to invite Edward Lehman, who was the country researcher for Malawi, to give us the state of the legal framework for Malawi. And of course, as you see during his presentation, he's going to just touch on what he discovered when he was conducting that research for Malawi. Edward is a part-time lecturer at the University of Malawi with experience across conducting surveys and studies across multiple countries. His main area of expertise and analysis is on budget analysis, policy analysis, and conducting public expenditure tracking surveys. Edward, I'll invite you to unmute your mic and share your presentation.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. So once again, my name is Edward Lehman, and I conducted this study in Malawi, of course, with the help of my colleague, Mr. Crispin Kalusa, who is a legal expert. So this is the outline of my presentation. And of course, we're all here because we understand and appreciate that philanthropy is a human trait that has been embraced historically. And actually, in the ancient Greek, philanthropy was an expression of course, civilization. However, even though this is the case, literature on philanthropy and, of course, the legal framework in which various organizations operate in is scant, especially in countries like Malawi. So we conducted this study in Malawi, of course, to look at the existing legal frameworks that either promote or inhibit philanthropy. So the 6 thematic areas that we looked on were to do with the ease of registration, compliance issues, the tax regimes, and of course, if at all there are incentives. And we also looked at the movement of financial resources, as you know that philanthropy also involves monetary issues. And we also looked at support for advocacy. So let me jump to the methodology and go straight to the key findings. So from the literature review that we did on the laws and the various policies in Malawi that affect philanthropy, we found that fairly or relatively, there exists a very conducive environment for conducting philanthropy in Malawi. Actually, there is a well-established legal and policy framework for philanthropy in Malawi. So these are some of the issues that we looked at. So in terms of registration, we found that there are various laws that affect registration of a philanthropic organization. For example, the Non-Governmental Organizations Act. So if you want to register an organization that will be conducting philanthropic activities, you have to follow the guidelines and the processes that are highlighted in this act. Also, maybe if you want to register your organization as a company so that it can be a legal entity on its own, you can use the Companies Act, and in there you find the processes and as well as the procedures that you have to follow. Also, the Trustees Act. So maybe you want to register as a trustee, you have to follow the procedures and the processes that are there in the Trustees Act. And there are, of course, some organizations, maybe they want to be directly helping the handicapped persons. So there is an act that guides the registration of companies or organizations that are going to be directly helping the handicapped. So that's the Handicapped Persons Act of 1972. Now, when it comes to compliance issues and procedures, you find out that the laws and the acts that I've just mentioned on the ease of legislation, they're also there to guide compliance as well as issues to do with reporting and making sure that you are complying with the relevant authorities and the guidelines that are provided by the government of Malawi. But in addition, we also have the National Non-Governmental Organization Policy of 2019 that guides issues to do with compliance. So in the policy, you find how you are supposed to conduct yourself, to whom do you report, what are you supposed to report on, and issues to do with those processes of compliance and procedures. And in terms of the tax regime, we found that there is the Taxation Act, and this one, it highlights issues to do with taxes. And with regards to philanthropy, we found that actually the Taxation Act exempts philanthropic organizations from paying income tax. And also, if you are an individual and you are trying to contribute to philanthropy, you are also exempted from some taxes. And in the process of conducting philanthropic activities, maybe you are doing some transactions that may attract stamp duties. We found that actually the Stamp Duties Act exempt such stamp duties when the transaction is about philanthropy. And also, we found that in Malawi, there are so many incentives that can promote philanthropy and that can promote the role of philanthropic organizations. So these are some of the acts, including the Road Traffic Act, the Communications Act, Business Licensing Act, the Customs Procedure Code. Actually, if you are trying to import goods and services that will be used for philanthropy, you are trying to import into Malawi, you will be exempted from customs duty. And also the National Non-Governmental Organizations Policy, the National Social Welfare Policy, and the Community Development Policy, they have some issues that highlighted, and they promote the role of philanthropic organizations in Malawi. So actually, if you want to work in Malawi, if you want to contribute to the philanthropic sector in Malawi, you'll be guided by these acts and policies, and also your role will be promoted because actually do have policies that promote the role of philanthropic organizations. In terms of the movement of financial resources, we have the Malawi Diaspora Engagement Policy. Actually, we have a policy that encourages people that are out there to contribute and to share whatever they have with Malawians back here in Malawi. So we encourage actually people that are outside Malawi to at least help whenever maybe we're facing challenges and issues to do with maybe in terms of crisis, maybe we do like some goods and services. We encourage people that are out there to contribute and at least send to us the help. And we also have the exchange contract. So if you are trying to move money outside Malawi, you have to at least comply with the Exchange Control Act. And we know sometimes the philanthropic organizations, maybe they are trying to influence policies, maybe to influence some change. So they will have to carry out advocacy work. If you are trying to do that, definitely you'll be protected by the Constitution of Malawi, which actually supports advocacy work. And also the Non-Governmental Organizations Act will also be there to protect you and to guide you on how you can conduct yourself as an organization. Now, from the survey that we conducted, actually, we found that most of the organizations that we consulted have been in operation for more than 10 years, so at least the results can be trusted. And 60% of these organizations identified themselves as charity organizations. And all these organizations indicated that they are registered and they also comply with the various compliance procedures that are in place. However, majority of the organizations feel that the registration process itself is so costly, and also they'll have to travel to the central office to register. So like the registration is not decentralized. So some of the compliance issues that are there, like for the organization with the banks, they have to declare the source of the funds, and at least majority of the organizations, they do comply to that. Actually, 86% of the organizations indicated that they comply with the issue of declaration of source of funds. And they also comply by submitting reports to the relevant authorities and the regulatory bodies. In terms of taxation, what we found is that most of the organizations, they do not know the tax incentives that are there. Actually, most of the organizations say that they do not know any specific tax code that affects philanthropy in Malawi. And of course, the organizations indicated that they know there are some policies that are there that promote philanthropy. However, we did not find any specific agency in Malawi that promote philanthropy. And of course, the organizations also say that it is difficult to move money across the borders, and it is expensive to do that. However, if you are trying to move money around Malawi, like domestically, the process seems to be very cheaper. Now, what do these results mean? So I think the key issues that we got from the analysis that in Malawi, we have a well-established legal framework. However, it seems the organizations have limited knowledge of the legal environment in which they operate on. And also, it seems the organizations are not aware of some developments that are happening in Malawi. For example, the Registrar General's Office, they introduced an online platform whereby organizations can register, but now the organizations are saying that they do not know of such developments. And also we have incentives for you to conduct philanthropic activities in Malawi. However, it seems also that most of the organizations are not aware of these incentives. So in terms of the recommendations, based on these findings, the recommendations would be that maybe government and their policy holders should try to conduct awareness campaigns on the legal framework as well as the incentives that are there in Malawi in terms of the philanthropic sector. And also, I think if you can have a specific agency to promote philanthropy in Malawi, I think we can help issues, and in the end, philanthropy can be promoted in Malawi. And also, maybe for the organizations, it would be good. It would be good for them to continue complying with the various authorities, so that their work is effective, efficient, as well as smooth. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think just highlighting that there's a lot of information that needs to flow to nonprofits in Malawi so they understand their own legal framework. So thank you for that. I'm going to move next to Botswana. But I think our country researcher for Botswana is having challenges. So maybe what we can do is, I hope it should be fine for us to, if we could just check in on him very quickly. Mokalova, are you back? Is your network connected now? No. Okay. All right, you're there. Okay, I'll give you 7 minutes maybe to do your presentation, and then after that we'll go to Zimbabwe. You've got the floor now, so please feel free to start going through your presentation. I think we will share your presentation from here. Maybe if you could just walk through it. Civil team, please, can you share his presentation whilst he talks through it? Mokalo, are you ready to your presentation?
Can you
So
ask
not-
Moholo just to say one word so that we can hear him? We can't hear him, Mohalo. Just one word, please. Probably his mic is not working.
Okay. All right. So I think we'll probably, all the presentations that have been done will be available after this webinar. So we can share that presentation. Country report for Malawi. The link has been posted in the chat. And you can look through that later or after this. I'm going to move next to the country report for Zimbabwe that was done by the coordinator for the Center for Philanthropy and Communities, who is Shelley Satuku. And so over and above it was a lot of work for her, over and above doing the country report for Zimbabwe, she was also overseeing the 10-country study. If we didn't clap hands for her enough in the office, I think we can clap hands for her today. She is the current coordinator, like I said, for the Civil Institute Center for Philanthropy and Communities. And she and Dr. Marisa, as well as other team members, played probably the biggest role in coordinating this work to bring out the index as well as the country reports that you've heard from today. Shelley, I'm going to give you the floor. Please go for it.
Thank you very much, Belinda. I think my previous colleagues have laid the background. Dr. Marisa has introduced us to why we conducted the study and helped us understand the background of the study. So I'll just quickly, I won't dwell on the introduction. I'll just quickly go through some of the objectives that sort of like informed the study, what we were trying to achieve. So the study sought to understand the extent to which the existing laws and policies have a bearing on philanthropy practices in Zimbabwe. It also sought to nurture policy-focused discussions aimed at enhancing the growth of philanthropy in Zimbabwe as part of the wider regional thrust. Also to influence the adoption of policies that enhance and promote philanthropy, but specifically just like what the Malawi researcher has has spoken to. The objectives were also to identify and assess how existing laws and public policies impact practices of giving, also sought to raise awareness of the challenges confronting the philanthropy sector. Hence, we sought to hear the perceptions of practitioners in the sector by conducting a survey. And also, lastly, to influence legal and policy reforms for an improved philanthropy environment. The study looked at 6 thematic areas framed around the ease of registration, compliance processes and procedures, tax regimes, incentives to promote growth, and the role of philanthropy in national development. We also looked at how easy it is to move funds within countries and across borders. And lastly, the ease of supporting advocacy-focused work. So on our findings in Zimbabwe, we noted that there are 7 laws, including a proposed private PVO bill that was amendment bill that was announced in 2021. So under registration, we have about 3 laws, including that bill as well, whose effects were sort of like being felt as some organizations were starting to register as private voluntary organizations. In Zimbabwe, let me just lay a little bit of background. In Zimbabwe, most philanthropic organizations are registered as either trust or private voluntary organizations. But we saw that from a previous study that the majority of them are actually registered as trust, because that registering as a trust is less bureaucratic and it's a faster process. But with the current PVO amendment bill that was announced, it will require for philanthropic organizations that are registered as trust to move their registration to PVO, which is deemed bureaucratic and bureaucratic process. And also with the PVO amendment bill, it is quite intrusive on philanthropic organizations or nonprofit or the nonprofit sector in general. And then under compliance, we noted 1 law, the Deeds Registries Amendment Act, and also the PVO bill is also featuring where we see it provides some compliance and some compliance processes and procedures as well. And part of the compliance and processes procedure entail restrictions to supporting political activities. And also looking at taxation, we identified one law, which is the Income Tax Act. And then under movement of funds, we identified the Exchange Control Act. Under incentives and support for advocacy work, currently there is no law that provides for the support of, for the provision of incentives that promote philanthropy for the growth of national development. Or we also do not have a law that governs the support for advocacy-focused work. But like I have mentioned, the Private Voluntary Organization Amendment Bill of 2021 has some provisions that sort of like restricts support of political work or advocacy work. So looking at the survey that we conducted, we had a database of about 29 organizations that we identified as philanthropic, and we shared a survey with them to gather their perceptions on the operational environment. Yes, we looked at the laws, we assessed the laws, but we also wanted to understand what the practitioners were saying with regards to the environments that they operate in. So we had 16 organizations that responded, and the majority of the organizations, 94%, identified as community foundations or charity organizations. Also, we sought to understand the extent at which practitioners have knowledge around the laws that govern their work. And also, since we're saying we're trying to advocate for an enabling environment, it would be good to have them on board to also help voice out and air out their views in order to come up with, to co-create policies that promote an enabling environment for philanthropy. So we also wanted to understand if they have knowledge of the laws that govern their area of work. But the majority of the respondents indicated that they either do not know how many laws were there, or they just don't even know of, or they were just unaware of such laws that govern areas of, for example, ease of registration, areas of movement of funds across and within borders, and then areas of supporting advocacy work. So generally, we just picked these few thematic areas, but across the board, we noted that on all thematic areas, the general sense was that practitioners are not quite aware of the laws that govern their spaces. And also we looked at, with regards to registration, the length of registration process and decentralization of registration centers, because our understanding is that the longer the registration process, the easier it is for organizations to register, and also to encourage formation of philanthropic organizations, and also issues to do with decentralization of registration centers, because some of the organizations operate in marginalized areas. So decentralization is actually a good aspect towards easing the registration process. But we also noted that under length of registration, the majority of respondents mentioned that it takes about 3 to 6 months. But again, the variations are due to the different kinds of registrations the philanthropic organizations have. Some are registered as PVOs, which take quite long, and others registered as trust, which is fairly short. And then on decentralization, the majority noted that there is limited decentralization. There are a few offices that deal with registration of organizations. So there is quite a need for that to be looked at in order to promote the ease of registering philanthropic organizations. We also looked at taxation and incentives for giving. So under taxation, we noted that in Zimbabwe, there is no specific tax code for philanthropy. And also there is no designated philanthropy regulatory body, although we find various ministerial bodies governing various aspects of philanthropy, for example, registration or taxation issues. When practitioners were asked about the kind of exemptions that they get, we also wanted to understand if there is that form of support or measures in place to promote or to encourage giving or to encourage the philanthropic sector. We also noted that practitioners noted that there is exemption around value-added tax and also customs duty and other taxation regimes. Moving on to incentives for giving, 63% of respondents indicated that there is a tax benefit for individuals and corporates who give to philanthropic organizations. Some of the tax benefits, like I've mentioned, on customs duty and exemptions on customs duty and value-added tax, 55% of the respondents concur with the reality that there is no philanthropy policy in Zimbabwe, and that is and there is no law that provides for incentivizing philanthropy for a wider national development. We also looked, since finances are a greater part of philanthropic organizations, we looked at their sources of funding. It was interesting to note that the majority indicated that they receive funding from individual donations, like Dr. Marisa has alluded to. there is a rise in the middle class in Africa. And we see that these people have been donating to various causes of philanthropic organizations. So it was quite interesting to note that individuals do give, and there is a need to promote and to encourage giving from individuals, and particularly giving to Africans by Africans. And also we noted that official aid is also part of the source of funding, as well as membership. Looking at the flexibility of the laws on movement of monetary resources, and also the cost across the borders. I just looked at across the borders, but you can take a look at you can read the report for more insights, as you also looked at movement of funds within Zimbabwe. So across the borders, respondents noted that the laws are fairly flexible, but the cost is quite high, which is quite deterring when it comes to cross-border philanthropic flows. So in conclusion, we noted that registration as a trust is deemed easy, hence more organizations have registered as such, but the PVO amendment bill might, if passed into law, might sort of like require for organizations to then register as private voluntary organizations, which is a tedious and cumbersome process. Infrastructure for online registration of nonprofits seems ineffective, and most are not even aware of the existence of online registrations. Laws for registration also guide compliance. For example, the Deeds Registries Amendment Act and the proposed amendment bill. On compliance, we also noted that banks also provide compliance processes and procedures that NPOs have to adhere to, or philanthropic organizations have to adhere to. For example, they are required to, some indicated that they are required to declare their source of funds, which is a mandatory thing with the banks. And lastly, at the moment, no enacted law affects the support for advocacy and human rights work, and no law makes provisions for incentives to promote philanthropy in national development. So we noted that, especially where there are no laws, it seems like the state or governments are free to sort of like impose certain administrations that may seem to affect philanthropic organizations. But there is need, definitely there is need for policies to be developed that promote philanthropy in national development. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that overview on Zimbabwe. That was Shirley Satuku, who, like I said, is the coordinator for the Civil Institute Center for Philanthropy and Communities, and she was the research lead for Zimbabwe. Now, I think as Shirley drinks some water and takes a 20-second break, I'm just going to go through some of the comments that have come through from the people who are in attendance today. Most of the comments are from people who are already in the Zoom room. So Stigmata has been very active. Stigmata was in agreement with the, I think this was the introduction by Dr. Marisa, saying we definitely need an enabling legal environment for domestic resource mobilization on the continent. Melody was loving the dialogue and saying it's very informative. Ramsey was thanking the team and saying it's a very insightful session and well done to Civil Institute. And Letumusa, thank you so much for joining us. Her question was on the other countries where research was also conducted, because we highlighted Botswana, Eswatini, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. Just so that you're aware, a total of 10 countries were surveyed. So Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And the reports for those are available on the Civil Institute website. So Civio, SIVIO, institute.org. If you go there and you look under research and publications, you'll be able to see some of the country reports for that we carried out. And some of the links to those country reports are being posted into the chat directly. I think now I would like to go next into an introduction of the index itself. And like I said, I've given Shirley a few minutes to take a break, and she's going to now talk to us about what all the country reports mean, and then she's going to introduce to us the Civil Institute SADC Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index. So Shirley, please just confirm that you are still doing that presentation, and if so, I'm going to give you would you be able to do it in 10 minutes, Shirley? And as soon as Shirley is done, we've got another somebody from Civil Institute. Instead of me coming back in to introduce her, I'll introduce her now. As soon as Shirley is done, our program manager, Eda Joa, is going to come up, and she is going to then go into the next presentation. So for those of you who are not aware, Eda Joa is the programs coordinator for Civil Institute, and she's also doubles in as the lead for the Center for Civic Engagement. And she's going to be talking to us and giving us guidelines, presentation guidelines on philanthropy in the SADC region. So Shirley, please introduce the index to us, and then back to back, Eda is going to come in and walk us through.
Okay, thank you very much, Belinda. So after all the presentations have been made, the in-country presentations, we then synthesized the country findings and then came up with an overall SADC report. And then, and also Dr. Marisa has introduced the background of the study. And maybe just to go through the context again, we noted that philanthropy in SADC and more broadly across Africa is growing. But again, there are issues with the shrinking civic space where governments are increasing their restrictions and over-regulation on the broader civic space, where philanthropy organizations and the philanthropy sector is a subsector. We also noted that there is no coherent approach to promote philanthropy within the sub-region, the SADC sub-region. Our initial hypothesis is the success of each sphere of economic and social activity is dependent upon the existence of a set of predictable, easy to understand and positive laws, institutions to implement the laws, and adequate political will. Our other hypothesis was that philanthropy thrives in a region where there is a conducive legal framework that supports and nurtures the practice of giving by reducing bureaucracies around the area of registration and generally the operation of philanthropy organizations, and also providing incentives for those who give. I'll go through the methodology because it also touches how we came up with the overall index. So we looked at 10 countries, and then we employed mixed research methods where we did a desktop study of the laws. We assessed the various laws that affect philanthropy across the 10 countries. And we also deployed a survey to gather the perceptions of practitioners in the space to hear their views with regards to the operating environment. Like mentioned, we looked at 6 thematic areas that we thought have a bearing on philanthropy. And with all this, we produced the Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index, which we're launching today, and 9 country papers as well as an overall paper. So from the overall paper, our findings, we noted that we have 75 unique laws that affect philanthropy across the SADC region. We have Malawi, like the researcher has presented, with favorable conditions that support the ease of philanthropy in that country. We see that they have at least 13 laws that govern philanthropy, and we have a lot of those laws falling under incentives that promote philanthropy for a wider national development, which is quite encouraging for that country. And we see that we can draw some lessons from Malawi. We also see that countries like Zimbabwe, unfortunately, they score lower on the ease of doing philanthropy index, and it could be attributed by the PVO bill that was proposed. But we also see Botswana has quite a few laws, and what was unique, what was uniform across board was that most countries do not have laws that sort of like promote incentivizing giving or philanthropy towards a wider national development. And I think that is something that can be noted as we work on creating enabling environment and promoting philanthropy. Interestingly, Malawi again, it is the highest number of laws, like I've mentioned, and then the country researcher has also shared with us some insights as to the various type of laws that govern different areas of philanthropy. Around compliance processes and procedures, most laws, like I've mentioned before, that govern registration also make provisions for state oversight of philanthropy organizations. And from our findings, 8 out of 10 countries have laws that regulate support or advocacy work. And then Botswana and Lesotho do not specifically have laws that restrict the support of advocacy work. Like mentioned before around the Financial Action Task Force recommendations, I see that some of the recommendations that states are implementing are quite restrictive, but to some extent they also guide compliance of philanthropic organizations. And then when we looked at the perceptions from practitioners, again, we surveyed about 140 organizations across the 10 SADC countries, and we were guided by the 6 thematic areas that I've mentioned before. And then, like, it was quite uniform across the board, the type of organizations that, the kind of organizations that responded to our survey. The majority of the organizations identify themselves as charity organizations. And then we also looked at source of funding. Again, it's quite uniform that individual donations, official aid, and membership constitute the bulk of the sources of funding of organizations across the board. And then we looked at the perceptions of practitioners on the legal environment. We asked about their knowledge of the laws, and like I've mentioned before, it seems like most of the practitioners are not quite knowledgeable of the laws that govern their spaces. And then we looked at their perceptions with regards to ease of registration. In this area, we're looking at length of registration process, cost of registration, number of documents needed, the ease of producing the documents, decentralization of those registration points, and availability of online registration means. I think for the sake of time, I'll just move to compliance. Under compliance, we're looking at factors to do with registration renewal, compliance with the bank, just those. And also we noted that under frequency of registration, most countries had respondents indicating that renewal is done annually, where we see Malawi had the highest number of respondents. In Tanzania, 67% of the country respondents indicated that renewal is done after every 10 years. This is also helping the state to have an oversight of philanthropic organizations. 22 laws across the region guide organizations' compliance and so that they remain registered. In some countries, as part of state oversight for organizations to remain operational, they are obligated to renew registration. And in Zambia, for instance, to remain operational, organizations are governed by the Non-Governmental Organizations Act and are required to renew their certificate of registration and should apply to the board at least 3 months prior to the expiration of the registration. We also looked at raising, the ease of raising and moving of monetary resources within and across borders. During our study, we also noted that there is the Common Monetary Area, which is an agreement between, an agreement that exists in Namibia, South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland, which helps movement of money, ultimately aiding in the cross-border philanthropic flows. But we do not see such agreements happening in countries like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, for instance. Some of these restrictions on the movement of money, we also noted that some of the restrictions on the movement of money cut across borders, as many countries are trying to adhere to the FATF recommendations to fight money laundering and terrorism financing. In 2023 alone, we noted that at least 3 SADC countries were grey listed under the FATF, and through various countries, through their various financial intelligence unit. So all these are affecting philanthropic flows in a way, although there are provisions that are helping, that are there for a greater good, but we also see that they are sort of like hindering philanthropic flows in a way. We also looked at the flexibility of the laws for movement of monetary resources and the perceptions of respondents. They noted that the laws are fairly flexible. The majority noted that the laws are fairly flexible with regards to the movement of monetary resources. And then movement of monetary resources across borders, again, the majority, 56%, noted that the laws are fairly flexible. We looked at taxation. 65% indicated that there is no tax code with regards to philanthropy, and there is no country that has a designated philanthropy regulatory body or a philanthropy promotional agency, like I've mentioned before. But we see that various ministerial bodies govern different aspects of the philanthropic organizations. And then looking at incentives to promote philanthropy as part of national development, 54% indicated that there was no tax benefit to individuals or corporates who donate, whilst 46% indicated that there was a tax benefit. This are just results across the board. We noted about 4 types of exemptions, tax exemptions, that were awarded to individuals or corporate donors across the board. Interestingly, South African respondents indicated that there is a tax exemption on those that donate towards charitable causes. And then lastly, to look at the support of advocacy focused work. 77% showed a lack of knowledge around the existence of the laws that affect the support of advocacy and human rights focused work. Botswana and Lesotho do not have laws that directly address that area. And then we also looked at South Africa, where we see that the Abolition of Restrictions on Free Political Activity Act of 1993 was enacted to revoke the laws that were placed under the apartheid rule. So with this law, we saw that there was then liberty for support of advocacy and governance-focused works. However, the country's Income Tax Act prohibits PBOs from using their resources to support such work that is political or governance governance work. So with that, we go on to the Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index. We launched this index. It got online on the 1st of March, and I think it was quite a great project, and I'm quite happy to introduce it today, and would really appreciate your insights also and your contribution towards the betterment of the index, because if we look at the databases that we built, the aim is also for us to continuously enhance the index. So it would be good to also hear your contributions to strengthening the index. And to access the index, you can go to www.africanphilanthropy.org. Just to take you through the site navigation, we have tabs, various tabs. We have the About, the Laws, Organizations, and the Reports tabs, as well as the dashboard. So under the About, it outlines the methodology that we used to come up with the index, where we looked at the perception index as well as the objective index. We also built a database of laws, the 75 laws that we gathered from across the 10 SADC countries, and also a database of organizations that we surveyed. But on the index, we have about 106 of those organizations. We sort of like encourage organizations also to register to be part of that database if they identify themselves as philanthropic organizations. And under reports, that's where we see all the country reports, some of them that have been presented today, and the overall SADC report that I've just presented. So for more insights, you can go to all the reports and find out more on the findings you got from the survey. And then the Tableau, the dashboard uses the Tableau visual of scoring. Then the scoring process, it was quite a long process, but it was quite a learning curve as well. And we looked at the perception index and the objective index. So under the perception index, we used primary data where we surveyed organizations and key decision makers were the people that provided their perceptions with regards to the operating environment for philanthropy for their organizations. The perception score was calculated across several defined variables. Like I mentioned, the 6 thematic areas around ease of registration, compliance processes, etc. And the score was assigned to each classification question based on how the majority responded to the survey to give the countrywide perception of the environment. And each question was assessed on a 5-point scale. And looking at the objective score, all this is housed under the Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index. For the objective index, we did a desktop research where we assessed the laws that affect philanthropy across the 10 SADC countries. Each policy was then reviewed to ensure that it made reference to the and is aligned with the existing laws. A team of reviewers assigned a score to each of the identified laws, and again, we were guided by the 6 thematic areas that have been mentioned. And we used a key of 1 to 5, where 1 is very difficult and 5 is very easy. So each country was then assigned a score. And then the index itself also houses laws, like I've mentioned. We gathered about 75 laws across the 10 SADC countries. And then these laws were only specifically relevant to philanthropy and not just any law. So this is how the objective index looks like. where we have the scores. On the index, like I've mentioned, Malawi scores the highest on its objective score based on the laws that we have explored, since like Malawi has quite a number of laws that sort of like support philanthropy work. Unfortunately, my country scores second from last, with Mozambique being the last. And this also entails the kind of laws that are in place and the policies and also the proposed bills that may affect the ease of doing philanthropy in those countries. Now moving on to the perception score. So when you go through the perception score, we see that, like I mentioned, it's from the data that was gathered from practitioners on how they view their operating environment. Interestingly, on the perception score, Malawi scores last. And I think it's just about how people view, it's about law versus practice. I think there is further interrogation that is needed there to actually see what is going on in Malawi, because the perception score from the practitioners says otherwise, whilst the objective score ranks the country highest. So I don't know, is it a matter of practitioners not being aware of the laws that govern their work, or there is that disconnection between how practice is vis-a-vis the laws that are in place? So we have the ranking, the ease of doing philanthropy index ranks all the 10 countries, Malawi being at the top and Mozambique being at the bottom. So overall, in the SADC region scores 3.1, which is somewhat easy. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I would invite colleagues for you to go to our site and navigate. We have filter functions which you can make use of, and also would appreciate your feedback with regards to the interface of our platform. With that, I thank you for your humble attention.
Thank you, Shelley. Eda, I'm going to ask you to share your presentation. So as I said before, Eda is the programs manager, programs coordinator for Civil Institute, and also the project coordinator for the Center for Civic Engagement. So she holds multiple roles, and she's going to talk through about guidelines for philanthropy in the SADC region. Eda?
Thanks so much, Belinda, and good morning to everybody, and thank you for your time. So I won't take too much of your time, but I think what I'll share is, one, these are initially our thoughts and ideas that have come through based on what we've discovered and what we've seen has come out from our study. And I think it's an opportunity in a space which I think Marlon alluded to earlier in his presentation, but I think it's coming out in a lot of the presentations and even in the overall report, is really the need for around, discussion, further discussion, interrogation, thoughts, discussions, and both from practitioners and those with, from the philanthropic organizations, but also then with governments and with state actors, around how the space can be made more of an enabling environment and allow for the growth of philanthropy and the potential that we see in philanthropy. So just give me a second. Please just let me know if you can see my screen. Belinda, just confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, thanks. So as I said, these are just initial thoughts and ideas, and it's also something that's we outline in our presentation in our report, the overall report at the end. So for us, we feel that it definitely, what our study is showing is that there's definitely need for an outline or framework for philanthropy that one at the SADC level, but also at national level. So we feel that this outline fits both at both the national level, but can then also be modified and come up with something more at this regional level. And just the proposed outline or framework. And this is something that we want to then take and speak to with others in the space, and other stakeholders, the organizations that participate in the survey, see if we can then also, as I said, with state actors to then see, would this outline work, and just as I said, the proposed ideas around it. So one of the things that we feel that needs to be there is an affirmation clause, so just general consensus, especially by the philanthropic organizations, stating the intention to establish and be bound by the guidelines. And then also to have background and objective of the guidelines, and then core values and shared principles by philanthropy organizations for the effective operation. Given what we see and the potential and the evidence of the good work that comes out and is coming out from philanthropy and its role and contribution, are there core values of principles that can be shared, within country and across the region, that will help philanthropic organizations to be able to effectively operate. And then also understanding the role of philanthropic entities towards national development. And I think that will then help in the shaping and crafting of, laws and policies that will help, for philanthropic organizations to be able to effectively contribute towards national and regional development. As Shelley alluded to, in the survey, I think only 3 out of the 10 countries did, both from the desktop analysis, did we kind of see some sort of legislation or policy, that provided guidance, on how, non-state actors and potentially philanthropic entities can contribute towards national development. And then the fifth thing is around just universal rights of philanthropic nonprofit organizations and the extent of their reasonable, in brackets, limitation. So what rights could be afforded to philanthropic nonprofit organizations, and what then is the extent of their limitation? And I guess it's, creating, as I said, that scope and operating environment and context that also just allows for some regulation, yes, and ensures that our researcher from Malawi, raised issues and challenges around, some of the tax clauses and how others have tried to take advantage of it for tax benefits, but so how then, can all of that be managed, but ensuring that, the rights of philanthropic organizations and their operations are not infringed upon. Then, obviously, identification of the barriers of affecting the effective operation of the philanthropy organizations, and we felt that the starting point really could be around those 6 areas that we identified and put under investigation through our study. And then also just adding a 7th element, which then speaks to around the rights and freedoms of philanthropic entities. Then within those barriers affecting, so it's outlining what the barriers are and then the potential policy, recommendations, challenges, how then certain laws, can be either enhanced or redesigned or reframed, to ensure that those barriers that have been identified can be overcome, and there's a more enabling environment for philanthropic organizations in country and across the region. Then we also feel that it needs, recommended standards and best practices that, could then be seen as and applied that can help then in enhancing the space. And then the final thing that we thought of was a schedule or annexure, which is a code of conduct for philanthropic organizations. But this one is something that, again, will definitely need co-creation and the inputs of philanthropic actors, but also, and to some extent also state actors, but like in what ways will philanthropic organizations conduct their work and hold themselves to account? It could allow then for some sort of peer regulation in country amongst philanthropic organizations, but also across the region, in understanding that there is the standard and code of conduct of how entities will operate. So we've, done some of the work and, come up with a draft, which I think we can share, I think across with, people who've participated, but also more broadly with other stakeholders who've been involved in the process to come up with some sort of draft, that I think we can begin to share and see if it'll work in country, but also across the region, and start the process of engagements, to come up with some sort of guidelines or framework for philanthropy organizations in the region. But for us, just in terms of running through some of the areas that we've developed in terms of a background, I think the key aspects, around why the need for these guidelines, the shrinking civic space, the tightening regulatory framework for around nonprofits, but the states also coming with the counter argument of the need to, tighten laws affecting civil society organizations, the need to protect national interests in the face of illegal activity, the rise in illegal activities such as money laundering, financial terrorism, and how then those can be curbed, but still allow philanthropic organizations, to continue and carry out the good work that they've been doing. What we've been seeing really is that a lot of the state measures, have, this tended and have erred or tended to be on the side really of over-regulation of the space. And a lot of it has been top down. And I think, the basis, and it highlights really the need for engagement and discussion really around how this space, especially the philanthropic space, which is a subsector of broader civil society, can still, yes, there is still state oversight, still, legislative, a framework, but it really does not inhibit the work that is being done by philanthropic organizations. And then, just objectives around the guidelines really is to have a universal document guiding regulation of philanthropic environment within the region, provide guidance for states towards work of charitable organizations. There was mention earlier about, there's quite a high number of organizations who didn't have a full understanding of the legal framework and laws governing the space, but at the same time also, states and state actors having really a full understanding of philanthropy and the space and, the nature and work of philanthropic organizations. Objectives really to also reveal to highlight some of the negative impacts that some of these laws have on the ease of doing philanthropy. And then also, the guidelines really to create a code of conduct to guide the actions of philanthropic organizations in country, but also across the region. But as I said, this is something that will also start, sharing for just more insights from those within the space. Just to highlight some of the core guidelines or principles that we think, should be in these, in the guidelines, the respect for sovereignty and independence of static nations, but the recognition of the need for service, based on the values of Ubuntu, recognition of the responsibility to account for philanthropic organizations, then in their actions, as they undertake operations domestically and with external partners. Transparency in running philanthropic organizations to ensure national growth, but also understanding the rights of philanthropic organizations to lawfully, effectively, and freely operate without undue limitation by the state.
So, sorry, Eda, I'm going to have to stop you. Thank you so much for that outline and that guideline. I think, as Eda has said, this is a framework that we are proposing. I'm not sure what would be the best way to share it. I think Dr. Mrisa will probably give an overview when he does his closing remarks. But before we get closing remarks, we've got Engineer Remigius Makumbe, who we've asked, who is a former SADC Director for Infrastructure and Services. And he is going to be talking to us about domestic resource mobilization, philanthropy in the SADC region, and then domestic resource mobilization from the Secretariat lens. So if you remember, Marlon talked about what that could look like, or the challenges and the opportunities from a nonprofit perspective. And we're going to ask Engineer Makumbe to talk to us very quickly in about 10 minutes or so about what that could look like from a SADC Secretariat lens. And then if there's any questions, we might take those, but we haven't got any questions so far. We will then get our closing remarks and hopefully still be on track to end our dialogue at 12:30. So, Engineer Makumbe, I'm going to invite you to give your input. If you are connected, please may you unmute your mic and turn on your video if you'd like to be seen. You're also welcome to do the presentation without the video, but I'm sure people would like to see your face. Okay.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this particular all-important forum. My name is Remy Makunde. So I'm just going to post my quick presentation so that we can follow it. It's not going to take a long time. So with that, I'll probably just disconnect my video for the time being and then post my presentation. So once again, thanks for this particular invitation. I do appreciate this invitation. So I'll be talking about the case for philanthropy in the SADC region. And as I said, I'm Remy Makumbe. I'm basically a freelance consultant and advisor in infrastructure, regional integration, and cooperation. So I do consult around Africa and sometimes on a global basis. Just an introductory background. Firstly, just to say what we found in SADC is that obviously funding is really a key resource to sustain the implementation of programs and projects in SADC. But also there is really the broad consensus that we have realized to prioritize domestic resource mobilization. I think even the summit of SADC has continuously made those sentiments. And also several options have been identified actually in the SADC region to particularly implement the SADC Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan. That is the SADC strategic plan. In 2017, I think Marlon was also involved a lot in this development of the project that we did, which is innovative ways of funding the SADC regional integration agenda. And also, just after that, we then also developed the SADC resource mobilization strategy. This was basically to systemize resource mobilization for SADC. And the two documents were actually undertaken under the auspices of the Southern Africa Trust contracted by SADC. The process we then had was informed by practices by ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, ECAS, Central Africa, as well as the African Union Commission. But I just want to highlight here the 6 options that we came up with in terms of the innovative ways of financing the SADC regional integration agenda. And the outcomes were that there was those 6. The first one was export and import tax. And then was a tourism, was considered as a possibility, a tourism levy, and a financial transaction tax, and also a lottery system. But also it then emerged that philanthropy was indeed a very good source of funding programs and projects. Then finally it was regional events where SADC would convene such events and also collect some funding, basically on the basis of certain principle. But in line with this, SADC was also developing the Regional Development Fund, which is going to be the channel through which all funding will be disbursed throughout. Then in terms of the the Council of SADC, they really felt that this was really a feasible way of funding SADC programs at the end of the day. But also what they believed was that it could mobilize a lot of resources, and that also SADC programs could also benefit from these specific resources, and that we should make efforts to try and also leverage such funds. But just to indicate that the major funding for SADC is multilateral development agencies. We're talking about the World Bank, AFDB, and similar ones. Bilateral funders, basically these are mostly the countries that have got bilateral to SADC, and also some bilateral agencies that are not necessarily states, as well as the domestic funding coming specifically from states and banks and other institutions. But in terms of the study that was undertaken, there was more interest in the regional import levy because it resonated with the customs union, where you in fact identified the common external tariff, which would then be in sync with the collection of the taxes. But the big question is the extent of implementation by SADC, particularly with regard to the very same one, which is the levy, as well as the philanthropy. But just a quick check our experiences in terms of funding, and we do believe that this can also impact on the issues around philanthropy. The challenges we faced in terms of implementation of the projects. Firstly, we've realized that we don't have an adequate pipeline of bankable projects. It's an issue. Limited capacity in terms of member states, as well as the SADC itself in terms of capacity to implement projects through the various value chains. And the limited funding for the projects remains a major problem. But what we've also discovered is that some of the sectors attract more funding than others. For example, ICT really attracts a lot of funding, and also because the returns are good, and it also employs what we call the user praise principle. But however, there is a number of ways of accelerating the issue around funding. Firstly, the cost recovery user pays principle is important. Multi-country cross-border projects also attractive, and also there is also the need to have. I heard you talk about the regulations and other issues, but in this case, you need to have established vibrant financial institutions and capital markets, stock exchange, etc. But this could also apply quite largely to the philanthropy. Sustainability, particularly in terms of policies, this is something that we continue to call for, and also attracting private sector participation, particularly to share the risk, to enhance the shared risk between the state as well as the funders. It's also in terms of these key issues, what we've realized that we need harmonized regional policies, regulation, legal and institutional. High bureaucracy, we need to cut it down. Also, we need to have one of the challenges is still low domestic savings, which makes it very difficult to raise funds. High budget deficits and tax revenues in most of the countries, and also heavily indebted countries as well as low-income countries. They've got very difficulties, big difficulties in sourcing funding from multilaterals and others. But I just want to end by indicating some of the issues basically that would impact on philanthropies. That this is already the last slide. What we realized that philanthropies also require enabling and documents. and processes for the sake of transparency when they provide their funding. That there is also a lot of propensity by the same, in other words, philanthropists, to finance programs in livelihoods as well as people-centered projects. And also there's need for a very robust business case to obtain approval by philanthropists, particularly to justify the business case to the principals. Co-funding can also be an issue that can also propel the provision of funding from philanthropists. So it is important that this can also be considered. In previous experience with funding from such sources is also an added advantage. So for those that have got a track record, obviously you stand a good chance. Issues around currency fluctuations may also disadvantage, particularly from those that are coming from outside the country. So I think these are just some of the issues that we need to look at. But more importantly, I think we also need to look at SADC and see if they can consider implementing the program on funding through philanthropists, as well as assistance in terms of providing the enabling documents and also the conditions in the member state, because a collective approach will be quite helpful. So this is just what I need to just share with you in this very little time, but I do believe that it is time we looked at every possibility of funding so that we could have more funding to fund a number of programs in the different areas within the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that succinct presentation, Engineer Makumbe. And he was looking at philanthropy from a SADC Secretariat perspective. He's a former director for the SADC Secretariat. And he was looking at what other forms of domestic resource mobilization could look like and the opportunities that are there. So we've heard a lot today, and we have successfully introduced to you our SADC Ease of Doing Philanthropy Index, thanks to the work from the Center for Philanthropy and Communities within Civil Institute. Like I said before, the index is available on the Civil Institute website. It is online at africanphilanthropy.org. The link has been posted in the chat, but I'll ask somebody from Team Civil to just post that link once again, just for anybody who might have missed it. And we haven't received any questions. If there are any, you can post them very quickly. But I'd like to give us a chance now to get our closing remarks from Dr. Tendai Mrisa, just to round up all of this for us once again. We've heard a lot from the different countries, the researchers that were involved in research in the different countries. We've heard about proposed guidelines for, how philanthropy and nonprofits could collaborate. We've also looked at the different laws, a total of 75 laws that are in existence in the countries that we surveyed. But then what does all of this mean? Dr. Mrisa, would you be open to unmuting your mic and just giving us a 5-minute rounding of what that could look like?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. Quite a rich discussion. I'm looking forward to the recording and the notes. I think what we learned from Remigius Makumbe and also from Marlon Zakeo are very important aspects, because I kept on asking myself, how does this align with what we are doing? But on further thought, there's a lot of alignment, there's a lot of thinking that we have to do. But before I give my closing remarks, just to break with the tradition or with the program, if I may ask, I see my colleagues from APNI here, Tarisai and Stigmata. If one of them could just come in and just share insights on how this sort of links with the African Philanthropy Network. We unfortunately do not have a SADC network for philanthropy like the East Africans have. So we rely mostly on our, we rely on our African mother body, the African Philanthropy Network. So both the director of APN and our spokesperson, our media specialist, Tarisai, are here. So it could be both of you colleagues, it could be one of you, it's fine, please. Tarisai, I know you're playing protocol. You're waiting to see if your boss will speak first. And your boss is waiting for you to speak first.
Yes, Tendai, yes, all right. Dr. Tenga, may you go ahead, please?
You colleagues have quoted me in sport. What am I supposed to speak about?
So basically, it is about how this report that we have had today, the EASE Index, really aligns with the work that is being done by APN. And already, Dr. Tenga, you might want to link this to the work that we have been doing in some countries with our partners, just to see how we can promote an enabling environment for philanthropy to thrive, and also the work that we have been doing under the Giving for Change program. Over to you.
Wow, this is a very noble space, and I never had expected to have this space. But first, I want to congratulate Civio Institute. When you have an institute which is doing such a great work in the continent, it makes you feel very proud. And I want to confirm our interest and our commitment to partner with Civio in ensuring that we are really deepening this work. The enabling environment in most countries in the continent, it's really in a bad shape in many aspects. Following up to the findings, we read about opportunities that are echoed by most of the colleagues who conducted research in different countries in the main project, but also we read about the challenges. So the opportunities are well written, and I was really following up. And for me, it is important that we look into those opportunities and start to see where can we invest our efforts in. But on the other side, the challenges are huge. And this is where the work that we must focus on is becoming more great and is becoming even more increasingly important. We all what has been discussed and decided upon by this study is what we also found out. But I'm so proud of Civio, because then we were able to link the study we did on also the horizontal philanthropy, because most of the time when we talk about the challenges that we have around taxation, we see them linked very much into institutional philanthropy and to what extent governments are prohibitive in terms of the legislation that is being set. But on the other side, I think there is quite a lot. I think that is the challenge I want to pose here. There is quite a lot of activities that are going on within the philanthropy, Africa philanthropy field, which is outside the tax framework. And I was happy to hear Tendai, my brother, reminding us of those aspects. We also need to see that. And also we are very fortunate to have SADC framework, which is looking to in all aspects, the institutional philanthropy and the horizontal philanthropy, which is key. So where should we put most of our efforts? Is it around domestic resource mobilization, to look into how we can amplify the work that is already going on as a way of counteracting the top-down approach, which comes with the need for us to, one, make our governments recognize the potential for African philanthropic practices and also global philanthropy as a strategy to bring about development. And that, I think, is the work that is awaiting for us to be able to engage. Happy to see our own regional economic body looking into this support. Happy also to see that there are many donors who are happy to support this work, including GIZ. Thank you so very much for that support, because we need this. But I also want to acknowledge the institutional framework for philanthropy, which is also supporting the work of Africa philanthropy support actors from the grassroots level through the global level, including, you have heard here, Wings being mentioned, is an entity which is looking to see how most of us as continental kind of specific philanthropy bodies, we are able to look into these aspects and unlock the potential for philanthropy, so that we can see both the community philanthropy, our own domestic philanthropy, and the global philanthropy's interest and benefits is really working towards unlocking the potential for the sustainable development in our continent. But again, let's also look into how much we are not tapping into the private sector. And that came very vividly through these oral studies. And it's not because we don't want to, but I think it is the framing. So we really need to find each other and find ways that for us to unlock more resources from the private sector. We cannot continue to mention the Masiyiwas and the Dangotes. I think there are so many individuals who are readily available to invest in the development, but then where are they and what is it that they're doing? Tapping into the middle class and how we are told that there are multi-million dollar millionaires in the continent who are ready to give. Where is that? How can we tap into that and see that all those resources are supporting the development of our country? Lastly, but not least, I did not know how many minutes I'm given. I'm overly excited, as you can see, is for us to develop an infrastructure which will help us to have a common voice and a common agenda for philanthropy. We cannot do everything. I've seen the opportunities listed were massive, but also on the other side, you see the challenges are huge, but we cannot do everything. So we really need to align our work, our capabilities and our strength into common agenda and say, maybe we should do this at this point in time. And then maybe after a certain point in time, we monitor how far we have gone and also unlock another area. There are so many areas that need to be touched into. But again, I agree 100%. The tax framework, the enabling environment, which touches from the way philanthropy institutions are registered, from the way taxation is not supporting us to be able to mobilize resources internally and from the foreign funders, from the way we are not having the correct framework for us to do resource mobilization, from the fact that there are huge issues for civil society organization, including philanthropic actors, to comply upon. And this is beyond our capability to be able to comply upon, which lead to a shrinking space. But also from the way our own government putting oversight on the work that we are doing. It really pushes us back. And unfortunately, the ability for us to push back is limited. And I think it's limited because we are fragmented and we work so much in silos. So my call is, let's all rally around these very potential findings, like the findings shared by Silvio today here, and see what can we take and do it together in collaboration. There is always strength in working together. And there is always destiny in really influencing, there is always dignity in influencing our own destiny. Thank you very much. And Silvio, congratulations again. Let's chat best ways of forging this collaboration ahead, but keep the ball rolling. Thank you for kickstarting these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stigmata. You keep us energized. You lead us very well, and we appreciate the support. And we appreciate you, Tarisai, and all the members of APN and the great work that you're doing. So here's our immediate offer. What people always say, how do we start collaboration? Our immediate offer is these papers, yes, they are hosted on the Seville Institute website, but Shirley, Edda, and Tarisai can talk about how they can also be hosted on the APN website. And also the index itself, how can it be hosted if the APN wants on their website? That's how we collaborate as members. We bring all our products into one repository, and people don't have to go to many organizations' websites. They can just go to APN and they see what their researchers are studying, what they've come up with. That's their members. Then also in the room with colleagues from Wings, I saw Casey Kelso is here. Thank you so much. Not so sure about what it meant for your time zone issues, but thank you for making the time and thank you for the support. So I'm not so sure, Teresa, do you have something to say? Then I lock it up or you are done. The boss has covered everything.
Thank you, Tendai. Dr. Tenga has really covered everything, but I'm really excited about the potential partnership that we have already doing as Sivio is a member of AP, and we've been disseminating your work widely and reports as well. And we will continue to doing the same. I'll be in touch with Eda to see how we can have these reports on our websites as well. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Teresa. Just before I close, there's a question from David Bernard about how do you define a philanthropy support organization? So over the years, for some of us who have worked in philanthropy now, we feel like ancestors. There's always been a need to say philanthropy is a nascent space in Africa. And many people are working in philanthropy normally work in isolation from others or in silos. So ideas came up to say, how do we support those who are doing the work in Africa? But we're not the ones who originated the idea of philanthropy support organizations. WINGS is a global philanthropy support organization, just to help with things that philanthropy organizations will not be alert to, like a shrinking space, policy challenges, best practices that can be shared. That's how philanthropy support organizations came up. EFC being one of the big ones in Europe. There are quite a number in the US, the Foundation Center, and many others that really support the growth of philanthropy and promote best practices within philanthropy organizations. What is left for me, colleagues, is to thank all of you for making the time. Like I said earlier, it's a Tuesday, it's midday, you got other things, you could be anywhere else, but you chose to spend the past 2.5 hours with us. So we're really, really grateful for the time that you spent with us. We do not take it for granted. We'll make sure that you get, I could see, and I saw a problem. I could see colleagues trying to share the link for each report. Then I said to myself, this is a problem in itself. So it will be fixed by end of day today or tomorrow. There will be a link to just all the reports. You download that link, you've got all the reports, because I don't understand why you should download, then download, then download. Just download once. Like I said, we'll make sure that this happens every now and again, that we have these discussions. There's a lot to unpack from Shelley's work, the pioneering work that she's doing. I put Shelley on the spot. She had intended for me to present this for her. Then I waited until late last night. Then I just sent a message to say, you are going to present. And I think she did a great job. That's one of the things that we're trying to do at Sivio here, to nurture young talent, to really understand that there is a succession that has to happen across generations. So this being a first regional presentation, she did a fantastic job. And I'm so excited about what we're seeing in terms of the growth of the younger members within the team. And also, I'm happy that we have this product. I think it speaks to certain things that normally would get others to do this for us. Others would come and map us. Others would come and analyze the environment for us. But it's good to see an African organization led by Africans beginning to understand and to try to analyze its own environment and begin to influence policies within its space. It speaks to the maturity of African thinking and African contribution. So this is it's very significant in the fact that, due to the fact that 10 years ago, we did not see any of this happening, but we are beginning to see more and more of this. And like I said earlier, we are not the only ones who are studying philanthropy on the continent. There are many others, and that is worth celebrating by itself, because it talks to the maturity of Africans and so the maturing of the sector as well. So this in itself is an important development. So colleagues, thank you so much. I tend to speak a lot, especially when I have nothing to say. So I think we can end here. I'll hand off back to Belinda just to close us off if there's any housekeeping announcements, etc. But I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doc. So I think as a commitment, we will, in an email, we will send that one link that we've promised with a link to download all the reports. after this webinar. So this is to everybody who's still in the Zoom room, or anybody who's attended. And if you're interested in getting access to that information for whatever reason, if you can't access it on our website, you can get through to us at info@civiurinstitute.org. Thank you so much for everybody who has attended. Thank you to everybody who has made a contribution today. All our researchers, Marlon, and to Engineer Makumbe, thank you so much for your insightful presentations. We really appreciate it. We will try as much as possible to share any presentation that was made today, again, in the communication that we'll send out after this webinar. From myself and the team at Civio Institute, thank you once again and have a good day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Certain people were supposed to retweet my posts.
Cheers, colleagues. See you again.
Thanks, yeah.